Ciao.
Nobody has the movie I want.
Hey, if it's up
for me, please, sir.
I can say one or two words for you, sir.
There we go. That tends to be one of the things that people do. Although last week Chuck counted to 4, and I feel bad because I keep bringing it up because then I was like, "Wow, you can count to 4." Show off. Adam Christianson is here with us, everybody. Adam Christianson. He, of course, oh golly, on Monday's Mac OS Can, I said podcast pioneer Adam Christianson was going to be with us. Well, it's true though. It's true. When you told the story of how you started and how people found you and all that stuff, I'm like, yeah, because I've been around, but you've been around.
Yeah, before directories existed.
Before directories existed.
Before iTunes. Pre-iTunes.
Way before iTunes.
It was the dark ages. People just had to fumble around and stumble on podcasts.
What really annoys me is the first time I heard about a podcast, I want to say it was in September of 2004. It was when they had that thing at Stanford, and it was the first time anybody had talked about podcasts. And I want to say that was the same weekend that Will Wheaton was a guest on Inside Mac, because he was at that podcast thing and he was talking about that. And I remember going to a friend of mine later and I was like, I have to start a podcast. And she's like, what are you going to talk about? And I was like, yeah, you got me. And, and that's why I wasn't in the first round.
I mean, if it was September 2004, I started December 2004. So
yeah, well, I didn't start anything.
You knew about it before I started.
I did know about it. That's true. I had heard about it and I was excited about the possibility, but I totally had blank slate syndrome. I had no idea what I would talk about. And now, give me 5 minutes and I'll make up another podcast. But you know what? We're actually going to be talking about podcasts later this week. And can't imagine why.
I can't imagine why.
Monday, though, we don't do that. Well, I mean, unless that's your story, which I hope it's not, because we're planning on talking about it later this week. Monday, I do, of course, take the show and turn it over to the guest, because I want to make sure that we're talking about something that they're interested in, not just stuff I'm interested in. Plus, sometimes I learn stuff, too. So when I have Adam on Monday and say, it's news to Adam, what are we talking about?
I want to talk about this guy that's suing Apple for basically denying him access to his $25,000 worth of apps and video purchases through their service by terminating his Apple ID.
Okay. Can you fill me in a tiny bit on this? Because I asked you, is this the story where Apple said nobody in their right mind would assume that just because you can download something once, you always can? But you're bringing stuff to it. I think I read a different version of it that didn't maybe concentrate so much on the guy. How is it that his account was canceled?
I'm trying to remember the details. It's been a while since I went through the story because it was a couple of weeks ago. But when this came up, I think.
Skip that part if you want to. I mean, tell me what it is that makes this the story that you want to talk about this week.
So what makes this the story I want to talk about and why it's sort of on my mind is it actually came up with my audience. Because somebody was more talking about the fact that what happens when I buy all these movies and all this content through Apple and I die? Can I transfer this stuff? Can I move this stuff to somebody else? And what I think people don't understand in the age of streaming and even in the age of Apple and movies and stuff like that is that when you're purchasing content, you're actually not purchasing content. It's not like a DVD, right? It's not like you own this thing. You are purchasing a license, a right to basically watch it from Apple. And so they have no obligation to you in terms of ownership of that content. And it's very much different than, because I think a lot of people think about it like DVDs, and that's sort of where this guy is, right? I bought $25,000 worth of stuff with you. You owe me if you deny me access to it.
Right.
For whatever reason. And so it's an interesting lawsuit from that perspective. But if you read the terms of service, which, everybody reads the terms of service, right?
Right. They even made it a graphic novel. I don't think anybody read it.
Right. Exactly. And so, he's claiming it's deceptive practices and you have a buy button. So buy implies a certain language or a certain ownership of something, which, I can I think a reasonable person would think if I'm buying something, I own it, right?
Right.
But it's really not the case. And I think that most people really don't understand that. And so it was interesting because we were having this conversation about, what if I die and I want to give my kids this content? I bought a bunch of movies on iTunes. I paid a bunch of money to own it, to have it in my own catalog. So we're not even talking about just, subscribing to a streaming service, which I think most people kind of get that, but maybe even still don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting in this digital age that, there's this debate about what is ownership of content. And I think if you go back in reality, like, we never really owned any of it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you buy music, you don't obviously own the music. I think people get that, but you own a CD, which would give you the rights and ownership to play that whenever you wanted. Right. But now that we have these digital versions that we don't have physical copies of, that sort of dynamic changes. And I think people haven't really glommed onto that or really gotten that.
I honestly think we might be talking about two different cases, because there was a case that I covered, I want to say either on Thursday or Friday, of macOS Ken, where somebody in California was suing, and it had nothing to do with having an account canceled, but it was to do with they bought a movie and then they didn't actually download a physical copy of the movie, or they didn't download a file of the movie. Then the movie became unavailable, and they're like, well, what's going on? I paid $20 for this movie, or however much it was. And Apple's argument was no reasonable person would expect that that movie would always be available on their platform. And
that's another...
That I disagree with. I think as you're talking about, so, I mean, the cases do overlap a bit. If you hit a buy button, that indicates to you that you're going to have it. At the same time, taking the DVD analogy, if I go to Target and buy a DVD and that DVD gets broken, I don't expect Target to give me another DVD. Where the problem comes in, it seems to me, where the confusion comes in, I mean, like, okay, so if you have a home media server and you buy a movie, go ahead and download that. But they're encouraging so many people to, like, watch through the Apple TV app, which is on your iPad or which is on your Apple TV. You can't download the video to Apple TV. You can download it to the iPad, but if you didn't max out your storage, you're going to fill that up pretty quickly. I mean, I guess you can keep it on something else, but that doesn't really solve your problem of, like, okay, so if it's my kids, because then they take that hard drive full of movies, plug it into their computer, it's going to want your, or the person who's passed on, it's going to want their username and password, and it's still going to be DRM'd out anyway.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I was just kind of rereading through quickly this article that I came across. I think it was over at Infinite Loop, and there are two separate lawsuits. So the $25,000 lawsuit is the one I'm talking about. The one you're referring to is another lawsuit where exactly Apple used that argument. Yeah. So there's kind of two things going on. But again, they're both related, and it's not really so much about the lawsuits. It's not the lawsuits that I care about. It's more about this misconception or misunderstanding that I think people have about the age of that we sort of live in terms of content and ownership and how all that system works. And I do think it's really confusing. I mean, again, like, I can see the argument that, like, I bought something from you. I should own the rights to view that, whether, it's like on the platform or not on the platform. And and DVDs work like that. So it seems reasonable to assume when you buy something and you own it, I would imagine even if you downloaded a copy of that, it's got Apple's DRM on it, it's not going to be able to be authorized, right? So even if you had a digital copy, would it even play?
Well, the impression that I get from the second lawsuit, the one that I was talking about, is if you had a physical copy, yes, it would still play. The problem is once Apple and Universal part ways, and suddenly that old, 1930 whatever King Kong that I downloaded, or, take a real movie, because the one from the 1930s might be, that's a ridiculous one. Let's do, well, anything that came out in the last 5 years. If suddenly Apple and Disney split up, does my version of Black Panther still work? If I have downloaded it, then I assume it does. But if I've never downloaded it and their streaming deal is ended, or the ability for me to download it again has ended, then I can have paid for it all day long, which I did. It's not going to work if there's no file there. And if they've split ways, then there's not going to be anybody serving the file.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not available on their platform. Yeah. That's why I do download all of my purchases on my Mac, and I back them up to multiple sources. I never presumed, though, that they would work, because I figured it would never be able to authorize the DRM piece of it. But if it can, that's great.
I'm pretty sure that would be able to. It's just a question of would you be able to get it again, which is why I brought up my whole thing of, like, if I buy a DVD from Target and that DVD is broken, right, Target's not going to give me another one. I mean, if I broke it, that is, or if it becomes broken, or they might not even have it to give to me. Exactly. Yeah. And yet I do not download any of my movies. And so now I guess I know what I'm doing next weekend.